Welcome, everybody, to this great presentation. I'm so happy to be welcoming everybody here to the Museum of South Texas History, where our mission is to preserve and present the borderland heritage of South Texas and northeastern Mexico. We do that in a lot of ways. We do that with our Sunday Speaker Series, and this is a series that Manuel Hinojosa has been a part of before. I'm really just honored and as you say, blessed to be able to present this. This is a fantastic story, and I was lucky enough to meet Herbie a few years ago. We were reflecting on this. Manuel brought Herbie some time ago and said, hey, this is Herbie. He lives in Brownsville. Nobody knows his story. And as time has come to this, now we have this great book, and really Manuel's focus is to share this with everybody. So I'm very happy to present Manuel Hinojosa.
Rene, thank you very much, Rene, for the introduction. And thank you, the Museum of South Texas History. It's a fantastic museum. It's always a pleasure to come and talk to you, Dr. Guajardo. Thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you, everyone, for being here, including my family. Always here to support. But, like Rene mentioned earlier, I'm going to be talking about a person that really few people know a little bit about, in a sport that we know a little bit about too. As a matter of fact, I didn't know very much about it when I first started writing about this, or even discussing it with them. But the story really starts with the idea that one time I was going through the internet and I came across this name, Herbie Hinojosa, and Herbie Hinojosa. And I started reading a little bit more about him, and it got really interesting. I saw that he was really involved in a lot of races. As a matter of fact, after a while, I found him to be one of the most, significant, important people here in the valley. You always look at things like in a ripple effect. What do you contribute back down to the valley? You ripple out. How far do you reach, and what do you touch? This person touched, just that racing world, and that racing world was made up of a lot of important people, not only here in the United States, but in Canada. And it was in a sport that really was very popular at the time of the golden age. And when racing was probably your number one sport. After World War II, soldiers came back home. They really they wanted to be happy, have a good things to do, and one of the things was going to the sports venues. Baseball, football was just getting started, but horse racing, it was something. Then is not what it used to be, but still, it's worth the story in this golden age. The story is called Rode Hard, and the reason I named it Rode Hard is because I had a chance to talk a lot of the jockeys, these famous Hall of Fame jockeys that Herbie rode with. And one of the things that Chris McCarran, Kentucky Derby winner, really a big in his field. I asked him, I said, Chris, or Mr. McCarran, I said, tell me about Herbie. Give me a story, give me something about him. He says, Manuel, I can describe. Have you heard the story "Rode Hard, Put Away Wet"? And I said, not really. Well, that's Herbie Hinojosa. He was a hard rider and never complained. Went back in, taught us how to race. Herbie was responsible for teaching a lot of these jockeys back in the 80s. And it's funny, but those jockeys didn't even know what he had accomplished. I think that really had a lot to say for a person of his caliber, that he was very humble. And when I was doing my research on Herbie, and I didn't know him at all. I never heard of him, didn't know anything about him. And I saw this address. I looked at this address, and it's Brownsville, Texas. And the address was in Southmost. It was really a deprived area of town. And I told my wife, I said, you know what? I'm going to go and check out this place. I had an address. And I knocked on the door. And this lady comes out, and I said, is this the Hinojosa residence? He says, yes. Is there Herbie Hinojosa that lives here? And she turns around, she says, Betito. This little person comes out, and he says, yes, can I help you? And I says, I'm looking for Herbie Hinojosa. And he says, well, you come to the right place. he says, you're a famous horse jockey. He says, how did you know that? So I know a lot about you right now, sir. But anyway, we sat down and talked, and this friendship, this was 10 years ago, by the way, and this friendship was one where I saw him every weekend. And during this time that I saw him, I had these fantastic stories. I mean, stories that they're really unbelievable. As a matter of fact, I would go back into the internet and I do a search, and sure enough, it was true. He was a very humble man. He always told you, I always tell the truth. I'm not going to exaggerate. I'm going to tell it the way it is. And sure enough, I always confirmed that. And as we went through his stories, and I researched and I wrote down what he talked about, I found out it was important to come back and record his story. And from the first days that I met him, we started finding information, to put together. This is a picture that a neighbor brought to me in Brownsville, and he said, "This is Herbie," and the one on the left-hand side, this was an elementary school where Herbie went in Brownsville. This is Herbie was born in 1936. He's probably more like in the early 40s here in elementary school. And Herbie just went to the 5th grade. As a matter of fact, he didn't even finish the 5th grade. Herbie could ride horses at a very young age. His dad allowed him to get on the horses, and before he knew it, because of his small size, the local horse player was on top of him. They wanted him to ride their horses, and so it was easy for him to just leave the school and go ride. I mean, back then, I guess the truant officer wasn't as strict. Later on, it was something to do. His parents left. This is right before or during the war. It's after the Depression. Farming was not good. Parents were having a tough time. They even though his father was born around the Mercedes area, they chose to go back to Mexico and try to make a living. They just couldn't do it here. So Herbie stayed with an aunt. And from then on, it was just a matter of being with all the horse racing people and been taken to different races. Here's a picture that shows Herbie on a horse. To the right is a man by Gilmore Ledbetter from San Benito. He was a farmer, and he had horses, and he loved to raise horses in that area. The person to the left is a guy named Frenchie, guy from Louisiana, Cajun. Matter of fact, Herbie would describe him as the guy who walked around without any shoes. He preferred to be without any shoes on, barefooted. And so the valley is really rich in horses. I mean, think about it. We're basically a ranching community, and when you start getting into the Stark County and the Duval County, all those areas, they're ranchers, and their entertainment is a horse race on a weekend, match races, and Herbie got picked to do a lot of these races. So all of a sudden, there was these races back in the Montes, and that's when people got to know Herbie. And during that time, they call him El Changuito because he looked like a little Ledbetter called him Changuito. And he had a little picture of him on a goat, and that really to describe him. That's the way Herbie describes it. And so, but he got known. Everybody know what Changuito's racing today, and they would come and see him. When Herbie, this is a picture, and this picture, by the way, was not something we collected. I found it in a newspaper when they were introducing him at the Kentucky Derby. And somehow someone got these pictures, and they were describing Herbie's, rags to riches thing. And what this shows is Herbie racing. But one of the most interesting things about the racing back then, they tie him down. If you notice that white cord down the side, that's a belt. They would fill his pockets with rocks, tie him, bring it down, tie his ankle, go underneath the horse so he wouldn't fall off the horse. You're talking about a horse going 45 miles an hour, weighing 2,000, a ton, and with a child. This was 8-9-year-old on top of the horse. racing. Of course, you would never hear of something like that today, but that was going on back then. That was what racing was all about. And people flocked. They would bet their horses, their chickens, their farms, everything else on these races because it was really a popular sport, even though it was illegal, but it was done very much in the area. As a matter of fact, it was done on both sides of the river. Since he was growing up in Ranchito, right between San Benito and Brownsville on the river, it was very easy to go across the river and race on the Mexican side. And so the Mexican horse racers, including a lot of the, I guess it was, back then, I guess you could call it a cartel, you know. The famous guys that were involved in this is always going to be in a very dark type of a sport simply because there's betting involved. And so he would go race for him. One time, Herbie and I we're going to we're driving by the old International Bridge, and Herbie says, "Is that the bridge?" And I said, "Yeah." "Why, Herbie?" And Herbie said, "Well, Elizondo was killed there." And I said, "Who was Elizondo?" And I said, "I don't know. They call him the Presidente." And I go, "The Presidente what?" I said, I don't know. And he couldn't tell me very much about it, so I went and checked the newspapers, went back in the archives. 1952, Mayor Matamoros executed at that railroad tracks next to the famous restaurant that was there. And I asked Herbie, I said, "Herbie, how did you know this?" He says, "Well, I was in the car, he pushed me down, and he said, 'You were in the car?' 'Yeah, some guys came with machine guns and gunned them down.'" And I said, "What did you do?" I said, "I cried, I was a kid." And he ran to the next door, he knocked on it, and they opened it up, and then all of a sudden his car pulls up, "Get in the car," bring them back to this side. So that's the kind of, you know, the kind of life he was having very early in his life, but he was already, it was already part of his lifestyle, you know, and so this was Herbie's story from then on. He was never going to really grow up to be a child. He was going to be in the hands of people that like racing. Ledbetter decided to, after racing in the valley and doing better than anybody else, Ledbetter decided to go and try out the races in the West Coast. And I'm talking about New Mexico, Arizona, and California. He was waiting for Herbie to turn 16 years old so he could get a license. So he packs up his 6 horses in a trailer and starts to drive west. Keep in mind, you know, a lot of you all are very young, and you have to understand this. This is the 50s. In the 50s, there was not very many roads. Matter of fact, the road from here up north, and I'm talking about from here to Houston, was a dirt road, okay? And it wasn't until after the war where it was important to pave the roads, and it was important to have trucks. So where everything was on rail before, then since they built the paved roads, now you could have trucks, and it became a truck farming industry down in the valley. And so it was really hard to get to the West Coast, unless it's to the East Coast from this end of the world down here, the South Texas. And so this was an opportunity for them to come back in and get on these roads and go west. First stop was New Mexico. In the beginning, he had a lot of trouble with his luck. He broke his leg right away. He broke his neck after that as a young kid. But in any case, they ended up in California. And what's really interesting about when they entered in California, they got to meet Willie Shoemaker. He was a rookie, just started. Willie Shoemaker is probably the most famous jockey of all time, okay? So he has a real strong connection in the very beginning as a child. But Herbie was riding quarter horses, and thoroughbreds were the longer races around the track. Quarter horses were the quarter mile, straight as a dash. It's over, you know, in a very quick time. And that's what he was brought up in, and he had probably, you know, raced several thousand races by the time he got exposed to thoroughbreds. So he didn't really know how to ride thoroughbreds. But when he got to California and rode in the quarter horse races, Ledbetter really wasn't giving him a chance because he needed him to work more in the stable. So Herbie got tired, didn't have any income. He says, "You know what? I'm going to ride for somebody." And there was a stroke of luck in that he he was allowed to race and he won, and he won. Finally, he caught the eye of other people, like in this picture, Roy Rogers. Roy Rogers had a horse named Javon, and he put him on a horse. He was winning for him. So, and then all of a sudden, he ran into Walt Disney. Walt Disney loved horse racing, and his contractor was the one that was handling the horses, and so put him on his race, and he was winning on his race, horse racing. And he tells me a story. He says, you know, I went with the contractor of Walt Disney, and they were plowing all the fields, getting everything ready. And I told him, what are you doing? He said, well, we're going to do Disneyland. And he says, so I was in a truck watching all the bulldozers plow, getting Disneyland ready. Never went to Disneyland, but he saw Disneyland get started. I thought that was his luck during that time. Los Alamitos is your big quarter horse racing track in California. It probably was in its third or fourth year in existence, but horse racing was big. Herbie did so well that his Ledbetter said, you know what, I'm not getting anything out of this, I'm going to sell his contract. And he found out he was selling his contract. He said, you're selling my contract? You haven't even paid me a penny for my contract. Anyway, so he got upset with him, reported him to the stewards, which is in charge of the races, and they suspended, Ledbetter. Ledbetter got real upset, and when they were going through Las Vegas, since they couldn't race anymore, he said, Herbie, wait here, I'll be back in a minute. And he never came back. So he dropped him off as a young teenager in Las Vegas without any money, any food, anything else. And Herbie didn't know what to do. So he was looking for work. Nobody would hire him. He was this big. And some of the showgirls came across. Oh, hello, cute thing. Come over here, and I'll take care of you. And he got a little bit of money, stayed there for a while, and found a first chance, got a bus ticket to Reynosa Downs because he had stopped there on the way over there. He knew about it. And he asked to race. They didn't know who he was. He said, I still need your permission. To make a long story short, he started racing there. And during the time that he was there, he became the most famous, or the number one jockey in the quarter horse races in that area. And it's a really interesting story. It's a story in itself. But he got to know some of the big time quarter horses like Go Man Go, which is still famous, and his main horse was Bridan. And this is a picture shows the quarter horse racing. These are drawings that I put together because sometimes it was hard finding pictures. I did find this picture in a newspaper, and it shows Herbie as the leading rider in New Mexico. And it turns out his trainer right next to him was the leading trainer because he was the leading rider. So they go hand in hand. But after a while in New Mexico, it got rough. There was the first year he raced, 5 guys got killed horse racing. Then after that, there was more of people getting dangerous. So he said, you know what, go west. Try the thoroughbreds on the East Coast. He didn't even know that what that was. So he had already gotten married in his family and took off to the east. So he went from the southwest. He ended up in New Orleans. In New Orleans, there was thoroughbreds. And thoroughbreds was something new to him, but he learned how to ride, and eventually he was able to come back in and get onto other tracks. After a while, when they saw what he could do, he went into the Midwest, and that's where really got his opportunity. When he was racing in Detroit and those areas, after being in the middle, he ended up being in Kentucky. When I talk about the road structure, the East Coast and the West Coast weren't really talking to each other that much in racing. It wasn't until the the airplane was really Pan Am came in with 707 Boeing and 58, 59. All of a sudden, it connected the East Coast to the West Coast. And horse racing on the West Coast was different than horse racing at the East Coast. So he had to choose what side of the United States he went on. And now he was right in the middle. You know, this is a time when the Dodgers were playing in New York and the Giants were playing in New York, and then they said, you know what, let's try the West Coast. So where baseball was just like everything else would stop at the Mississippi River, things are going to change now. Now the West Coast was going to deliver that. This is the time that all of this is happening. So he when he gets he gets set up on these races. He goes to the Kentucky Derby for the first time in '58, and he meets all these guys. He gets to ride in the undercards. He meets Milo Valenzuela. He was the first Hispanic. Cubans had been riding for a while, but Mexican Americans had not been in the circuit. So he was a newcomer as far as Latinos in the South, simply because they just didn't leave the area. And so he was introduced to Milo, another Mexican American that was from El Paso, and they both started about the same time. Well, Milo got the opportunity to ride on one of the horses and won the Kentucky Derby that year when Herbie was there, and they became best friends after that. And so the two really were teaming up, and Herbie, and that's one of the reasons why you had these group of guys that started to know each other. His first big race was a well-known race in Detroit called the Michigan Mile. He had won a stake races. Racing is a 7 to 9 races a day, 365 races a year. Okay, and they're racing all over the United States. The bigger tracks are in New York and Florida, in Chicago, and California. And then of course Kentucky has the Kentucky Derby where you have the Keeneland and you have Churchill Downs. So these are the big areas, the big stages for racing. And so it happens that some of the other tracks, like Mid-Detroit, have a big race. And their featured race of the whole year is the Michigan Mile. Herbie went in with a horse named Total Traffic, and he won it. He surprised everybody. That's when he really took off with the racing. Winning a race like this magnitude was big. And so he caught the eyes of everybody else. He started with the idea of starting racing on the East Coast and Florida. Florida was not really allowing Latinos to ride. Okay, so when he went in there was a big push or to get him out of there, and he got disqualified a couple of times with the idea, don't come back. Okay, but he said, you know what? He figured out that Miami was a good base during the winter, because all the racing was done in the Florida area, and Washington, D.C. or Baltimore was a good base for the winter because you could fly anywhere in the United States because of what's available in plane. They weren't doing that, but Herbie was one of the first jockeys to take on that. So he gets called up in this big race in New York at the Aqueduct. Aqueduct is like the best racing track in the United States. And he has this horse called this new 3-year-old named Iron Rail. Fast horse. His jockey sends him away and says, "Okay, you're running against Ari Arcara, and you're going against one of the Kentucky Derby contestants." Well, Herbie clobbers him, destroys Arcara and his top horse there, and that's when everybody says, "Who is this guy? How could he come here out of nowhere and beat the master?" Arcara was a master. He was the best jockey at that time on one of the best horses, and Herbie was on an unknown, but beats him. Iron Rail was setting up. As good as he was winning all the races for Herbie. And 2-year-old, when they go 3-year-old, then they can run in the Triple Crown races. If you watched, familiar with Seabiscuit? Anybody watch the movie Seabiscuit? In Seabiscuit, in the movie, he races all these horses, and he never rides a Kentucky Derby winner because he never really raced. You have to be a 3-year-old. You're too young to ride it before 3, or too old to ride it after 4. Well, Iron Rail was going to get groomed for the Kentucky Derby. He was beating Carryback, which was your big favorite, and Herbie was riding his horse. Well, Arcara becomes his rival. And this is a race where all of a sudden Herbie has another horse called Hershigala, and he's beating Arcara, and on the races. Well, there's one horse in particular, and you're going to hear a little bit more, named Kelso. Kelso is a horse that, as a 2-year-old, another horse didn't run the Triple Crown races, but he won 60, 61, 62, 63, 65 years in a row, Horse of the Year. And Herbie races him here and comes in second to him, okay, because he's just a good horse on Hershigala. So at that time, a lot of now other Latinos are interested, are coming in. They're coming in from Panama. Panama has a school, and the Latino riders were hungry. They wanted to race, and they were little, because they didn't really eat a whole lot. And so there was an opportunity here to bring them in. They couldn't speak English, and Herbie could. So they started using Herbie as their interpreter. And one of the big ones was Braulio Baeza, was shown in this picture. Braulio came in and ran the first race with Herbie and beat Herbie. And after that, they just became competitors all the way through. But Braulio Baeza, after that, won many races, became a Hall of Famer also. And so this was the group that was making inroads everywhere. Herbie started really gaining gear to the point where there's these little cartoons that you see in newspapers, and this is Pap. This is probably the most famous sports cartoonist. Picks up Herbie, doesn't do jockey, does football players and baseball players, but he decides to put Herbie in as one of his cartoons in the paper, which was a big. He describes how he's an upcoming star, and which is really a big thing. This is 61, already in your 60s. Horse racing, #1 sport. Baseball, #2 sport. 15 million a year horse race. Football has about 8 million. Horse racing has about 40 million spectators a year. Big difference. Football just coming into play. Dallas Cowboys moving to Dallas, with the Dallas Texans playing at the Cotton Bowl. They lose. They're not doing very well. They lose all 10 games. Horse racing, big. Okay. It's the golden age. Herbie starts really making his name. These are the headlines. I'm finding these articles on the newspapers left and right. Headliners, it wins 5 at Laurel, which is opening day. He catches everybody's attention. You want to bet on Herbie. And these are the big racetracks, the big jockeys. Everybody else starts to really play into these races. Matter of fact, one of the pictures I have right here. This is the group of guys that start. This is Herbie. Okay, you can see the other guys are Willie Shoemaker, Johnny Longden, Bill Hardtack. Those are the name. They win every year. The best one. Last 10 years, nobody could beat those guys. Herbie starts beating them. They don't start winning anymore. Okay. And so out of that group right there, there's 15 Kentucky Derby winners, So you can see, it says a lot about these people. So you can see the kind of group that all of a sudden you're in the major leagues. Herbie then he's invited to the 61 Preakness. Willie Shoemaker is riding the Kentucky Derby. He doesn't want to ride so they give the horse to Herbie. He rides the Preakness. Then he doesn't win it, but he places, he gets money. He rides the Belmont. His friend Braulio Baeza from the Panamanian rides it, and this is the race.
$51,000 are out for the Belmont Stakes to see Carryback try for another big one. Former First Lady and President Eisenhower are among Carryback's fans, as the Kentucky Derby and Preakness winner goes for the third jewel in racing's Triple Crown. 9 horses get away, and as in the Derby and the Preakness, it's Globemaster who jumps into the lead and sets the pace. Following right on his heels is Sheer Luck, with Carryback, as usual, lost far behind. He's the heavy favorite with the crowd, and they're not worried, for he's a late starter who likes to come from behind. In the backstretch, Carryback, #2 on the rail, is not showing much speed, and he's passed easily by Ambiopoise. You'd have to bet $20 to win 9 on Carryback, and as he falls behind another slot, your money doesn't look too good. In the stretch, Sheer Luck, who's been dogging Globemaster, passes him handily. And the 65-to-1 shot under strong handling romps for the wire. A $2 investment returns $132.10. Brother, that's better than working. The news is all on the big board as the winner gets his trophy from Mrs. Eisenhower. This week's success story.
And his friend wins the race, but Herbie again placed on that one too, and Herbie had been riding Iron Rail. Iron Rail had gotten hurt. Iron Rail had beat the winner of the Kentucky Derby. They had 4 times before that. So imagine if he had an Iron Rail at that race. But that's the way racing goes. Herbie starts getting the East Coast races. There's a picture of Herbie. He's the second one from the end. That they had pools at the racetracks, and so there are a lot of conveniences. But I thought it was really neat to find a picture like that in the records. And Herbie starts riding the different racetracks and becoming one of your top names during that time. In racing, you have races on dirt and races on grass. Races on grass are the inner loop, races on dirt on the outside. You had grass horses could ride grass. Sometimes they could ride both. But Herbie had a horse named Bronze Baboo. He could win on grass. Herbie loved to run on grass, and this was a horse that really brought him a lot of wins throughout the years. As he moves along, and Herbie is starting to make a big name for himself, Florida was the preps for the Kentucky Derby. A big race was the Pimlico Handicap. This was the race. The winners here go to the Kentucky Derby, and there was Rydan was a favorite. Rydan was the monster horse, everything else. Herbie was riding Sunrise County, which is the horse that he's sitting on this side, okay, or the horse that a picture that I drew. Well, Herbie gets in that race. Nobody expects him, but he wins the race by 5 lengths against Rydan and all the other horses that could be possible. The stewards come back in, and they disqualify Herbie, and he says, "Why are you disqualifying?" He says, "Well, you went off too much to the right. That's not a disqualification." They disqualified him for 15 days, enough so he wouldn't ride the Kentucky Derby. And it was one of the most controversial races during that time. If he won that race and got into it would have meant a lot. And you can see them. He's standing. He's waiting for the results when they come back and says, "You've been disqualified." Totally unfair, and it was something that he had to live with the rest of his life, not understanding why he was disqualified at the Florida racetrack when he should have been going. Instead, they just disallowed him to race. Another great horse that he had was Ahoy. Ahoy came back in, and he was winning all the races. Again, him and Braulio Baeza were the ones that were being recognized as the heavy undefeated favorites. And and he was this horse was the next one to win the Kentucky Derby. Herbie starts doing well. That all of a sudden, Herbie's starting the idea of racing to California. He's in Florida. His agent says, "Send me to California. I want to send you to California." Races in California. After that, he goes to New York and in between he goes to Chicago. He doesn't even know where he's at. One day, here's your tickets, get on the plane, go race this race, come back in. He's winning these races. He becomes a leading rider at these racetracks. In other words, he won more races, breaking records left and right. It's just really something, that amazing feat that he was accomplishing. He goes to Santa Anita, and there's a San Fernando. This is Santa Anita's Willie Shoemaker's home. Don't mess with me. He's won every year. He's won leading rider. Every year he won. He had won the San Fernando Stakes 6 years in a row. He's riding native, one of the top horses of all time, native rider. So when they start the race, they take off, and everyone, Shoemaker's in front, and Herbie's with a group in the back. And this group just follows him, and finally says, I need to make my move. This guy's going to run away with it. So he makes his move, and he catches up to Native Diver. And they're going neck and neck, him and Shoemaker and Native Diver, and he's doing Crimson Satan. And as they're getting close to the finish line, at the buzzer, it's a photo finish. So So they wait a half an hour to see who, it was that close. Then the board flashes Crimson Satan, Herbie wins the race. Like, wow, Herbie wins the race. So all of a sudden, Crimson Satan is the horse to beat. So Shoemaker gets another horse. They go to the next race, the Strubs, which is like a Triple Crown of California racing. In that race, Herbie comes back and you can see them. He just blows them away like from 5. I mean, the most amazing race. All those guys in the back are these guys right there. The best jockey of all time. He blows them away. So all of a sudden, here's Herbie Hinojosa going to be the best of all time. He's racing these races. This is the other race. This is one of the ones too that Seabiscuit was racing. They call it the One Grander. Back then, $100,000 was like a $3 million race today. You know, these were the big races that were known back then. And Crimson Satan's Herbie's the favorite at this race.
The number 11 horse running third is Crozier with Braulio Baeza up. Horse race fans recall that 5-year-old Kentucky-bred Crozier made a career out of losing to Carryback. This time the top opposition is Crimson Satan, the favorite in the big field. But Crozier is making a handsome bid in the backstretch. Around the turn, Crozier on the outside has a head lead. Game 108 to 1 shot is second. Crimson Satan third. Crozier is not to be denied. Like a rocket off a launch pad, he's roaring to the wire, leaving favorite and long shot lengths behind. Crozier's victory is worth an even 100 grand.
But you can see how important these races are. These films are the ones they show in the movies, you know, during intermission. And Herbie, he finishes his race, goes back to Florida, and he wins leading jockey. He blows away the record over there. So he's just, you know, he's the guy to beat. This is a picture showing, that's Herbie's father. He invites him to the race. That's his father to his left. And, you know, he would send his family to visit him. He's making millions, okay? He's just doing that well. Horse racing is good if you can win the races. And so Herbie at the same time this is the handicaps, the grass races. This is at Bowie. He's winning the other parks. He's moving around to all the parks. He only picks the biggest races and he races them, and then he moves. There's 7 races. He only picks one, wins it, goes to the next one, picks out and wins it. So he's just moving around the country. He's all in the newspapers and all the United States, which was really important. He goes to Washington, Chicago. The first. And there's a headline. This is a Chicago Tribute, okay? The headliner, Hinojosa dominates opening in Washington. He wins 6 races, which is unheard of. Including the stakes race with 1 featured race on opening day. He just takes the lead, but he starts moving around, still winning the other. Goes to the other throughout the country racing. Just an unbelievable feat that he's accomplishing at this time. And that's him on top of the 6 winners. He goes back to the Michigan Mile where he first started, and by this time Carryback and all the famous Triple Crown winners are there, and he annihilates them to Michigan. The second time, and nobody had won the Michigan Mile twice in a row, and he's on Crimson Satan, and he wins that race. So he's just going up and down the country. He's going back to California after Michigan. He rides in the Hollywood Gold Cup. And this is a picture of Herbie right here in the front, by the way. They're featuring, he's a favorite. That's him.
$162,000 Hollywood Gold Cup for 3-year-olds and upwards. A field of 10 gets away at 1.25 miles. Number 2, Native Diver, the 4th choice, and 1A, Aldershot, 6th choice, set a fast pace.
There's 50,000 people in those stands, 60,000, you know. It's just amazing.
Crimson Satan is in contention, but suddenly begins to lose ground. On the outside, the New Zealand horse, Cadiz, number 5, is being given an excellent ride by Eddie Burns. Cadiz, 7 years old, roars to the front. And coming up behind him is 1A, Aldershot. but it's Cadiz, winner by a length and a half. Only a second off the track record, Cadiz.
So he's already California. He runs back to Chicago. This is going on a lot. He finds another horse. This horse that nobody has really heard of, but he wins like 4 in a row, and he's about to run. He runs the Washington over there, which is a big race, and Herbie gets ready to run the richest race in the world. At that time, it was $330,000, which is unheard of amount. The owner of the park is named Marge, and she's real picky, and she chooses who to get on. She wants Shoemaker to be at her events all the time because he's the one that draws crowd. These are the featured guys. You plug these guys, people come and want to watch the races. Well, Herbie wins the race. So there's Herbie kissing his wife. Beverly Hunt was his wife. She's half Cherokee Indian, and so he had met her back in the days of the Oklahoma. Well, she was from Oklahoma back in the New Mexico tracks, but you can see Herbie's already, just winning to the most of the important races during. This is 1963. The Woodward Stakes. He's already raced Kelso several times, and he's been coming in second with Kelso. And you can see right there there's his friend Milo's on Kelso, and Willie Shoemaker is on Never Been, and he's on Crimson State. He's the one on the red. So these are the 3 main guys that are racing, and this is 63. They're racing in October. There's 3/4 of the year. Herbie's racing for the top honors for the year. And this is Kelso. The one's won 5 in a row. 5 years horse of the year in a row. One of the most, in 100 years, probably one of the best horses of all time. And that's Milo and Shoemaker and Herbie. Herbie's in the red. The Yankees are playing in New York across the street. They got 50,000 people at the game in the playoffs. There's 70,000 people watching this race to show you Herbie doesn't win it. Kelso beats him again, but because he was just such a powerful runner. Herbie, after this race, and he's disappointed because he thought he could. He came this close to beating them the race before at the Campbell, and so anyway, they come back and tell him, you know what, you've been disqualified in a race prior to this, so you're off for 10 days. So he goes back to Miami. He's taking his kids to school. It's raining. He runs back to the house, and he slips, and his hand goes through the glass on the door, breaks his hand, cuts his tendons, the right hand, cuts his tendons, cuts his artery. They take him, they sew him up for 4 or 5 hours. Doctors want to come back and amputate his arm. And he says no. His wife says no. So he goes to Johns Hopkins. And, keep in mind, this was not on the track, so the insurance is not paying for it. So they go to Johns Hopkins. They want to amputate his arm. He says, you can have a stub. You can't use his hand anymore. Your nerves are gone. And so Herbie decides, no, I'm going to ride again. I'm going to ride again. And that's the kind of guy he was. Well, one day when they take it off his cast and they smell something, they find it, that the smell was not good. But what happens, though, they find the flow line, a blood line going in there, and so he could move 2 fingers, which was great news because they didn't think he could move the hand at all. So he goes back and he finally decides to go and try his luck again. Well, it's not the same. He walks like this, because there's just no. But he gets on a horse, and everybody gives up on him. Paul Blair, his main agent, his horses, he had the fastest horse in the United States. He had the best the best stakes horse, and he had the best grass horse, and he lost them all. And so he had to start all over again. So Herbie comes back in, and he finally gets back. And this is Herbie gone back to Washington, and the Sheridan Handicap. Mary Kine, she became the trainer and says, you know what, Herbie, you can ride my horse. I'll give you a chance. He wins that handicap. He gets back on track. He wins. He was winning 300 races a year. He only won 80, but that was a lot for a short year. So he gets back on track, and all of a sudden, Herbie goes back to Santa Anita. And everybody's giving up on him. They say, Herbie, I thought he was gone. Everybody was happy because they were now having a chance to win these races. That's Herbie, in red in the magazine of Turf on the right side. But he's brought back in Santa Anita, and we did well. But he's not they're giving up on him. They don't give him the horses he needs. They don't sign him up. He goes to a race to the Pimlico, which is the second richest race of the year, and he wins it. Like, you got to be kidding me! And he rides like this, with one arm. They call him the one-arm rider. He wins the race. That's his son Chuck. Chuck was born in '61. He's 4 years old there. So Herbie gets back on track. Herbie. He will keep on winning the 6 winners, and he's still breaking records. In '74, he runs the Preakness again. He ends up getting second place. He didn't win it, but he got second. This is a Triple Crown race. It's just amazing. Here's a guy that everybody written him off. He's still doing well. And he tries the big race back then was a Campbell. He ran it 7 times, came in third, never won it. Then he wins it. After all these years, he wins it on a horse that made him well known during that time. He runs in the last Triple Crown race. It was a Firm and Alalar. These are the 2 best horses of that time. There wasn't another until American Pharoah won it again. Herbie, in this case, comes in 4th place, which was in the money. Couldn't beat the 2 best horses of that time, or that's Triple, but he's in these Triple Crown races. Herbie rides for 50 years. A batter in baseball, if he gets one hit and he gets struck out, or he fails twice, he's a good hitter. In horse racing, you got to win races. You got to win at least your 3rd race or 4th race. You don't make any money, you go home. Herbie raced for 50 years, after that. And so horse racing is changing. Right here he starts getting older. He's still racing in his 40s. His son wants to be a jockey. He says, you know what, Dad, I want to ride with you. And he said, well, finish school and we'll talk about it. So they end up riding together. And this is son is Chuck, the one that he was 2 years old. Well, Chuck's riding with him. In a race, Herbie falls down, breaks his neck, comes back to Brownsville, recuperating. They knock out all his teeth. He's recuperating, and he comes back to see his son race. His son's doing really good. He says, son, I'm going back to the hotel. I'll come back, and I'll get with you after your horse race, but I'm tired. He had a brace here with a ring on the top. They knock on the door later on that day, and they said, we've come to tell you your son got killed on the racetrack. So Chuck was the horse behind him ran and smashed his head. He was instantly killed. And it really blew Herbie. He was his best friend. His son raced with him. They were proud to race with him. And so Herbie, it affected him to this day. And we talked about this, a lot. He just never really liked to talk about his son. This is we interviewed him towards the end, and this is a race that captured him on film. He's talking about racing Shoemaker. He's talking about the horse that happens to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Herbie came in Sports Illustrated 6 times, and when featured in one of the covers. That says how many sports figures of the Valley come in Sports Illustrated that many times. But this is an interview we had with him. Tell us about the first time you beat Willie Shoemaker.
He rode, this at Arlington, he rode He rode a filly, Silver Spoons, a great filly. In California, she was 4th or 5th in the Kentucky Derby. Well, she runs in Arlington, and of course she's that favorite. And I ride a 40 to 1 of I have no idea, but anyway, from running, claiming the 5,000s in Ohio. And I did tell my agent, I said, what the hell, you putting me on a horse like this? We're doing great. We don't need $35 that bad. He said, you got to ride the bad one with the good one. That was his motto. That's what he's saying. Try to ride the bad one with it. But anyway, I beat Shoemaker and damn nose. I beat him another nose. And, well, yeah, I don't know what I paid, but 80, 90, I don't know. She paid big numbers anyway. But, yeah, Shoemaker and I had a lot of fun.
Herbie was a poor man's jockey. He picked his horse. He didn't want to do what happened to him, what happened with Ledbetter, when Ledbetter dropped him, left him in nowhere. He refused to ride for anybody. He rode for himself. Shoemaker had 200 horses in his stable. He could pick and choose anybody. But he had the tycoons from Texas supporting him. What Herbie's talking about, riding a 40 to 1 shot. And I showed the Pimlico Futurity when nobody wanted him. That was a 50 to 1 shot. He won the richest race in the world. I mean, he could take a horse that didn't do that well and make him run. A lot of times they say, well, horses win the races. Well, Herbie will always say, I could win 1 out of the 3 races by my skills. And the horse, could win the other 2 with his skills. So it just said a lot about his determination and how the kind of person he was. Never gave up, never bragged. Always there helping. He taught so many jockeys that became Hall of Famers how to ride. But he learned the hard way. He struggled. He was picking bonbon or okra out here in the fields or shrimping in the shrimp basin when he was a kid. And then, was abandoned, dropped out of school. And he still, all he did all his life, nothing else but horse racing. And when he retired, he came back home because his mother got sick, and he didn't leave. And we lost him, last year, or before that, and so.
He rode.
I'm sorry.
He rode.
But Herbie was really a person that I learned a lot from, and to this day, we miss him. For what he accomplished. The book was all about writing about his life and not forgetting it, because I think he was on the verge of not being remembered for what he did. And a lot of it had to do because he was not being publicized like a lot of the jockeys in the North where horse racing was. But hopefully, by telling his story, some of you all remember him, and we can continue to share his story and just make it special. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.